Hi guys, we are going to start the session. So Saeed, you have to decide, coming in or out. So this is the third session about custom policies, and in this one we will discuss claims providers and technical profiles. So Omer will actually go into detail of the complete schema. What I will do is I will do a follow-up on the previous session about key management. So because there was a question about can you show where it is, so I will do that quickly. And then basically I've actually built a demo based on for a REST API to show you how you can actually integrate the REST API in the user journey and how you can use it actually to validate claims. I have this stuff all on GitHub and so on. I'll show you, and I'll do the demo, and then I will hand over to Omer so he can go in details. So first, the follow-up on the key management. So if you open up the Azure portal, you basically have the B2C extension, and everything related to custom policies is actually in the identity experience framework, which is still under preview. So if you go there, you see here on the left pane, there is policy keys. So I go to policy keys, and now you basically see all the keys that I actually have in my demo tenant here. So I have generated this previously because I need this for this REST API demo. But you can just do add, and then basically generate a key, RSA, or a secret. You can have the manual. That's the part I explained earlier. When you want to have like a secret for Facebook, you do this manually. You enter the string. Or you can upload. And with upload, you can do a whole bunch of things. Like you can upload a JSON key yourself. You can actually upload a PKCS12 file, which is actually a private key with a certificate. Or you can also upload base64 encoded certificates, or what is called PEM. So there are different formats supported. It's all in the slide deck that you will actually get. All these different formats are explained there. One more thing maybe. So mostly when you do add, what you basically do is you add a new key to the existing key container, or you create a new key container. There is one exception. You can actually upload a full key container. So it's a JSON structure. If you upload the full key container, it's basically meaning you take control over the key container yourself, and you can do actually what you want with it. So there's two different scenarios there. But most cases, you will just add a new container, a new key to a key container. If it exists, if it doesn't exist, you will create it. Okay. We'll close this. So now go to the session. It's okay. I will repeat myself. It's all about claims providers and technical profiles. So Omer will jump on stage in a few minutes to basically go into in the full detail of the full XML schema related to claims providers. I will first guide you through REST APIs. Some of the concepts, you should all be able to tell this yourself now, the first part especially. So the user journeys is basically a set of steps, and most of these steps are just about processing claims, right? So in the case of a REST API, you can easily look at it as exchanging input claims for some additional output claims. That's basically what you do, typically in a REST API. And so this is the use case that I actually will demonstrate in the demo. There is a special case, which is the validation technical profile. So a validation technical profile is basically used within a technical profile to validate the claims that you just collected. And so the use case I actually will do is a case which is quite a common case. So you want to check whether a user belongs to a certain community. This can be anything. It could be to check whether he's a citizen in a certain region by entering his national number, his name, address. You can actually validate whether this is a real citizen in that system. So that's something you would typically do in a validation technical profile. Could be a healthcare system where you basically want to check whether somebody belongs to the regional healthcare sector, what kind of role he has. And so that you would do then basically by collecting additional claims about that user. And I've actually done the demo to model both cases. So here is the GitHub, which actually has two Azure functions which implement validate claims. This is actually a check whether a user belongs to a certain community. And this community is a bit restrictive. So if you look at the implementation on the GitHub of the Azure function, the test that's happening there is basically whether the given name is Ronnie. So it's restrictive. Are there other people here from the club? Ronnie club? No? Jose asked me to join, but I refused. So then the second REST API is the add claims. And so we use them both in the policy. So you first check whether the user is part of that community, and then the second call basically goes and collects additional claims about a specific user. It also implements authentication from B2C to the REST API. So if you look at it, you learn how to do that authentication, and you also learn how to return multiple claims. Okay? So let me now jump into the demo. Going back to the blades here, identity. So I'm just going to run this from the portal. You see, I have my Trust Framework files over here, and so this is the demo policy, which integrates these two REST APIs. So it will first do the validate claims, checking whether the user I've entered is part of the community. And then basically the second step is to collect additional claims. There are two claims coming back. It's the city where the user lives in, and it's also the profession of the user. So we're going to sign up. I'm going to enter. Send the verification code. Okay. I need my glasses, I guess. Yeah, I needed a unique email address. So I should get the code here. Oh, here it is. Okay, so we passed the email verification, which basically proves that I have access to this email account. So I'm going to continue with the sign up. So display name, to Ronnie, but I will first give you a given name of Jean, B. Jones. And as I explained to you, this is going to fail. So the validation technical profile says, oh, you don't belong to this community. So that's basically what the way how this works. You can send back a HTTP to 200. You will pass. Otherwise, you get another HTTP code, you stop in the user journey, you block the user journey. That's the purpose of this validation technical profiles. So if I just enter Ronnie here, I should be good. So basically now in the meantime, the whole technical, the whole orchestration steps are being executed, and so as an end result, I've also changed the relying party policy to return these additional claims, which were returned from the add claims REST provider, and so here they are. So the slide deck contains also all the details. So we have way too much content that we can present on this conference, but it's all going to be available for you. You can go to the GitHub. There is a lab, so you can do it yourself. And so with this, I'm going to hand over to Omer. Maybe some questions, yeah?
What if your endpoint is not available? Is it like built-in retries, or just fail? Sort of there.
Yeah, if the endpoint is not there, you will get an error back, and so there will be a different error message. So there are different error messages that are coming back because this will be trapped by our service. We actually retry. We have a retry policy in reaching out to REST APIs, and at a certain moment it will fail.
Oh, but there is a retry.
There is a retry, yeah. Any more questions? Yeah, you have to cancel out of it. The user says cancel. More questions? You want to stop Omer? You need to ask more questions?
As many as you can.
Okay. So
What's your favorite food?
you go back, yeah?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
But there's also a mini demo for this tool that we have. So if you go to claims section of the same tool, you will get some interesting documentation. And since he has all the claims made up, he's made up the claims himself, we are not getting documentation that's specific to B2C. But if your token was a B2C token, the policy was B2C, or some standard IEF claims, then you would get documentation specific to that as well. So give it a shot. Again, give feedback about this to us. We are trying to, this does say this token was issued using an identity experience framework policy. So it does try to help a little bit with the debugging of the tokens. All right, let's. Yeah. So you mean if they end up with yes. So he has a valid comment. So basically, what we have noticed is the request to IEF and the enterprise AD all go to login.microsoftonline.com, and we have seen that sometimes the requests do not contain the P parameter. So if the application developer forgets, or for whatever reason the request doesn't contain because of the library bug or whatever, and you get a token and you're unable to validate it correctly, then you can paste that in this tool, and it will actually let you know whether it was a B2C token or an Azure AD enterprise token or IEF token. So that it also helps with those kind of scenarios.
Do you support the front that as part of the class?
No, so we do it as part of query string. Are you asking whether we support it as? I believe, yeah, it's also supported as part of the URL path as well. So both are supported. I meant if it's not in the request, then the token issued might be from enterprise ID, and then you're able to detect it here. I think they have both. They support both. Okay, so let's continue with our. I'll go with the presentation, and then halfway through I'll switch into the policy and go with that. You had a question?
Is this the same GitHub URL that was in the previous presentation?
Is it the same GitHub URL? This one? Which previous presentation are you referring to?
Prior to yours. I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, but
Ronnie.
yeah, I'm the guy who wrote the community.
He's the club, the Ronnie Club.
Yeah, the Ronnie Club. Well, I think that's within GitHub. So I just wanted to write it down. GitHub first features.
All right. So these are the topics I intend to cover what are claims providers, and in that I'll go through some technical profiles. I will go specifically through user directory, basically the Azure Active Directory where you're storing the users. And then REST API technical profiles, Ronnie has already covered. And then if we get some time, I'll go through policy and try to modify the policy, but I'm not sure yet how we might, how much time we'll have in the end. This I already showed earlier. These are the protocols that we have in our technical profile. The standard protocols that you can easily use are auth to OpenID Connect. And we also, in the public preview of IEF, we also support SAML. And other than that, we have a number of providers that do not use standard protocols, and they are referenced as providers in the policy. Okay, so let's start with Active Directory as a claims provider. That will walk us through a number of concepts that will apply to almost all other providers. It also tends to be one of the more complicated technical profiles because it's used both as a validation technical profile in the self-asserted to validate either whether a user's email or username has already been taken or not. And it also serves as a standalone technical profile. So Azure Active Directory can be called in user flow to find, to read the user or write the user object or do any other operation on the user. The way IEF models Azure Active Directory is as if it was any other technical profile, as if it was talking to Facebook or Google. The only difference being that instead of using auth to or OpenID Connect, we end up using a special provider called Azure Active Directory provider. Regardless, that provider sits within IEF and it makes Azure AD calls into the directory. Azure AD Graph API calls into the directory. So it's going to go and get a token for graph.windows.net, and then it's going to make a call to Graph as if your application, an external application, was making calls into Graph. The only difference is that there are some properties, a small number of properties that are not exposed to all applications because they are sort of protected properties. We are doing some work to expose those properties as well. But there's a lead time and there are certain challenges that we have to overcome. The reason I'm mentioning that is that other than those 3 or 4 properties, the 3 that I know immediately from the top of my head are listed here. Every other property, you can go to Azure AD Graph API documentation and then read the documentation and use it in your policy. So for example, if you go to the user object and you read that there is a property called country in the directory and you go and put it in your IEF policy in basically your Azure AD technical profile, you can actually use the country property. You can use city. You can start doing the same thing with other extension properties. When you retrieve a user object, all the properties you see as a third-party application, you will typically be able to use most of them, if not all of them, in your policies. Because Azure Active Directory has access to certain properties, as in the IEF framework has access to certain AD Graph properties, those properties need to be known ahead of time. All of them that AD Graph has access to, IEF has access to via AD Graph are already part of the starter pack. The special property out of those is the one called signinnames.email address. The actual public property that is visible through AD Graph API is called sign-in-names. It's a collection. It is a type. It's basically a name-value pair. So there's a type, and then there is an actual value of a sign-in name. So in the B2C scenarios, we typically create a user account where we say a user has a sign-in name whose type is email address, and then in the value we put the email address, the actual email address, a@b.com. Or we say type is username, and then we put the value as my name, like Umar or whatever the value of the username might be. But those 2 types are the ones that we're using in B2C examples and in IEF. You can actually go and use any string in the type if you want, as long as you're willing to create all the appropriate user journeys for that type. So for example, you can theoretically go and start putting a type called phone number and then actually stamp the phone number as a sign-in name, and the user can later come back and sign in as using that phone number. They can also sign up using their phone number which Azure Active Directory technical profile will be able to stamp in AD graph. So sign in names dot email address is just more of a way to say that the main property is sign in names, and the type we are using is email address for disambiguation. The alternative security ID and strong authentication email address are both currently protected properties. The alternative security ID will be exposed as user identities. So there is a property that will get exposed on AD Graph API. It will be called user identities, and initially it will only have alternative security ID of the user. The alternative security ID is basically the ID of a user in an external provider. So let's say I want to create a user in the directory that signed in using facebook.com. In the alternative security ID, we will take the user ID that we retrieved from Facebook. So that's their Facebook user ID. That goes in AltSec ID, and the second value that goes in AltSec ID is basically a string that identifies that identity provider, that IDP. So the AltSec ID property will be facebook.com and then the user ID of that user. If the same user was in Google as well, or a different user signed in using Google or signed up using Google, we will create an AltSec ID saying google.com and then the user ID of that user. So that is how the AltSec ID is structured in the directory. When it's exposed as a user identity, most likely there will be two properties in that structure, the user identity structure. Those will be called issuer and issuer user ID. So the issuer would typically be facebook.com or google.com. And then issuer user ID will be the actual user ID that exists for that user in Facebook or Google or that external IDP. If you go through the policy today and look at how alternative security ID is created, there's a transform called create alternative security IDs. That transformation will take identity provider and the user ID as the inputs and return alternative security ID as the structure. So that is the reason why that transformation exists. That is how alternative security ID flows through the system, and then it is sent to to AD Graph API. Any questions, or I'll continue moving on? You guys interrupt me if you have questions. These are the out-of-the-box technical profiles that exists in the directory today. I will go through the three that are marked with an arrow. But if you look at each one of them, typically they are going to either read something using a key, a user object using a key. So for example, the third one, AD user read using alternative security ID. Given that now I have talked a little bit about AltSec IDs, this technical profile is used for reading a user or finding a user based on their social identity. So let's take an example of a sign-in policy. During sign-in, a user goes to Facebook, federates with Facebook, Facebook gives back a token, IEF knows that this is facebook.com and knows the user ID. Now it needs to go into the directory to find the user object. That's when AD user read using alternative security ID will be executed. Because we expect the user to be found in the directory in a sign-in experience, by default, this technical profile has a flag set indicating that if the user is not found, we want to fail. We want to give an error to the user saying, you're trying to sign in, but you don't exist in the system. In the sign up or sign in user journey, we have some logic around if the user doesn't exist, create the user account. If they already exist, then we just move forward. And that is also accomplished using all these profiles in a different combination. Same example with AD user read using email address. When the user signs in, they're using their email address, or especially, this one is especially used in password reset. If you're doing a password reset and you want to find the user account before allowing password reset, we just go and find a user account using AD user read using email address. I'll move forward. The user write are the similar ones, but I'll move forward so we can go into more detail in each one of them. This is the AD user read using object ID technical profile. When IEF wants to validate the password, given our model of Graph API, where we are saying we model ourselves as an external entity to Graph API, is the same approach we have taken with validating the passwords. We make an ROPC call back to login.microsoftonline.com as an external application. And when you configured your starter pack at that time, there is a step that says go create this application and go create this second application and then take that IDs, put them in the policy. That step actually configures the application that IEF uses to authenticate the user. So in a sense, when a user comes to the login page and they give their username and password and they click login me or login button, whatever it is, sign in. At that time, IEF makes a call as any third party using that application's identity, makes an ROPC call, gives the username, gives the password, and then tries to get back a token. And if it successfully gets back a token, that means authentication succeeded and the user is a valid user. The password was correct. And that's how it moves forward. When it gets back the token, it has a few claims in that token. One of them is the object ID. It does not have extension attributes. It may not have country claim or city claim or some other claims. And what IEF needs to do after that is figure out what claims need to be read for the user object and need to be sent to the relying party. And to read those objects, those properties from the user object, it then makes a call back to AD graph, giving the object ID that it got from the token to AD graph to find the user object. So that is how that flow kind of stitches together. I'll show a little bit more about those. But if you look in this example, we have the first thing is the operation read or write. There are currently two operations that are supported. One is read, one is write. These are not the same as HTTP verbs of post, put, delete, update. Because during write, to optimize the number of calls we make into Graph API, if you say I want to write a user but I don't want an error to be generated, we have logic that will figure out that this needs to be a patch or a post operation. But if you want the error to be generated, then it will say, okay, in this case, it needs to be a post operation and I don't need to do a patch or a read before that operation because it's a post anyway. But if you determine it was a patch operation, depending on different settings, we might go and do a read. So all of that we wanted to hide so that we won't have to add multiple technical profiles saying read first, get the object ID, then attempt a patch on that. So for example, you can change the same thing to say I want to write based on the object ID, and you might have a different step saying I want to get object ID using email address, right? So we don't want you to go and have to start doing those multiple technical profiles for those operations. So in order to abstract that, we just say it's a read or a write. That's all you need to worry about. Either you're writing or you're reading. And if you're writing, we'll figure out whether it's a post or a patch or a combination of those. If it's a read, it's typically a get operation. You don't have to worry about that. The input claim determines that when we are reading the object, what is the primary key, what acts as the primary key to find the user. And that's, in this case, is object ID because we had already retrieved object ID from the user when we got a token from login.microsoftonline.com to validate the password. And then those are the claims that we are trying to get back because IEF needs to send them to RP. And if you look at that, the extension attribute also shows up there. If you had already done the pre-work that we had, I think one of them is to create an extension attribute, which is the loyalty ID. This technical profile still needs to say that at the top, it actually should have said that in the protocol section, it should have said that it's using a provider called Azure Active Directory provider. That does not exist here. And it also probably needs a few other settings. Sorry? Yeah. So the reason that is not included here is because right at the bottom, there is an include technical profile, AAD common. And what we do is for all the technical profiles we showed you before, we actually went and said everything that's common between all those technical profiles, we'll just put in one technical profile for easier management. And that easier management, let me get to the next slide. That easier management, too fast. Sometimes PowerPoint is too fast for me. So that easier management includes adding the object ID and client ID. So if we had not done this, we would have basically said, oh, go to every technical profile that we have created and go and add your application ID and object ID so that technical profile can know what to do with it. But instead, by using include technical profile, we just go and say, put your protocol, put app ID, client ID, your secret, and then include this in all the other technical profiles. No question? So you can use all the properties that are indexed. Okay? If you try to do that against AD Graph API, it will not work. You will need to use a different query for object ID and a different query for example, loyalty ID. But so that is the level, that is the kind of abstraction we have done. So here you can basically go and go based on the documentation from Graph API, any property that is indexed can be your input claim. And all extension properties are indexed by default. So your extension loyalty ID is actually indexed. You can run a filter query using Graph API and be able to get your user object. Non-indexed, for example, the strong authentication email address is not indexed. So if you try to go and use that to find the user, we will not be able to. We will fail. There will be some error thrown. There is similar to, as I was explaining before, similar to how we did sign-in names with email address. Even you will see some profiles that can use that as input claim. And so in some cases, the property, when it says it's indexed, you will have to use the IEF's version of that partner claim type to get the property. All right. So this is the common. I already went through it. So this storage reference ID. If you go back to Ronnie's demo in key management, he uploaded a key, and that key was assigned a reference, assigned an ID. This policy is basically saying that for issuer secret, I need to use that ID that was specified while uploading the key in the key management blade. So that is where this is tied together. So theoretically, you can have one key used by different providers, which is what we sometimes do. We just create one key, and then we have both self-asserted and Azure Active Directory and phone factor all using the same key, just by giving the same storage reference ID. All right, let's go to the self-asserted profile update. So profile update behavior is to show a list of claims that the user has on a UI, and the user needs to basically update their information. And one of the requirements for self-asserted providers is, or profile edit specifically, is that if there are any claims in the directory, they need to be pre-populated. And in order for them to be pre-populated, we will have a step before self-asserted profile where we'll read the user object and have all these claims in the claim bag. The self-asserted profile will have input claims and then output claims. And that's where it becomes a bit tricky. Let's say this profile did not have any input claims. The question is, what happens with the output claims and whether it shows or not. By the way, if somebody is not very familiar with self-asserted profile, please let me know. I can go into more details. The output claims, actually let me phrase it differently. In general, in IEF, any time we go to a provider, the output claim is what IEF gets back from that provider. That serves as the output claim. The question that we had to answer when we were doing self-asserted provider was, when the UI shows up and user is supposed to type some claims about themselves, assert some claims, what should they be? Should they be output claims or input claims? And we, after some discussions, decided that it makes a little bit more sense to model them as output claims, because IEF is handing over to the self-asserted provider, and after user types something up, that will come back as an output claim. It's no similar to what we do in Auth2 or OpenID Connect. So in Auth2 or OpenID Connect, we redirect over to Facebook. User in Facebook goes and types something up, their username and email and password and whatever. And then when Facebook gives us a token, we get that email address as the output claim. So it's exactly the same model in self-asserted provider. The only difference is that policy also acts as a way to force what shows up on the UI. So when we go and put output claims in a Facebook technical profile, that does not mean the user will actually be shown. That just means that whatever Facebook is supposed to show, it will show, but whatever we get from the token, we'll try to find those output claims. In this case, it's slightly different. When output claims show up in the policies, the self-asserted provider, just because it knows these are all the output claims, it actually ends up showing all those claims on the UI. And once it gets the values, it sends them back in the token. So that's the difference between, slight difference between self-asserted provider and other protocols. But other than that, the modeling of output claims uses a similar philosophy. In this case, if you look at the second section, there is given name, surname, and extension loyalty ID. That means the user will see a given name, a surname, and an extension loyalty ID or loyalty ID, whatever the display name is, those fields on the UI when they are at the profile edit. We have all three of them as input claims as well, which means that wherever we retrieved the values for given name, surname, and loyalty ID, that will be fed into self-asserted as well. Same way as we would do it for any other provider. So let's say we were supposed to give these values to Facebook or some other provider for pre-filling. We would send them as input claim, and then once Facebook shows the UI and we get back the value, we'll show them as output. We'll get them back as output claims. So that is the way self-asserted is modeled. If self-asserted provider does not have a validation technical profile at the end, no matter what user adds on the screen, they type on the screen and they select continue, it will just move forward. And it will provision all of those claims in the user journey storage. However, we do not always want to do that. So let's take an example of a sign-up user journey where we might want to validate some of the attributes of the user before we allow them to create an account. So let's say there was some, airline or some restaurant, and they had a loyalty ID as part of their whole, user membership where they give you discount, and there's a loyalty ID, and they have your given name and your surname and everything. And this one day announced that there's an application, and we want you to go and create, your online account, and you get another 10% discount if you do that. I'll happily go create an account just to get the discount. And but they want to add validation to make sure that you're not creating random accounts, or to make sure that you have a valid loyalty ID. At that time, when the self-asserted attribute provider shows those fields, before you want to move out of that page, you want to actually do some validation. You want to maybe make a call to REST API. That was the example that Ronnie showed, where there was a page and at the top there was an error. That is accomplished using a validation technical profile like this. So the REST API is part of the validation technical profile. Another example could be that when the user account is being created, you want to make sure that that user ID is not taken. If it's especially if it's a username-based account. Even phone numbers are sometimes recycled because a lot of people who disconnect, those phone numbers get reassigned. So you might want to go and check whether any of these attributes exist in the directory or not. That is also accomplished using a validation technical profile. The reason that we end up doing something like AD user write as part of the validation technical profile is because let's take a different example. Let's say I want to validate that there is no duplicate username. I could very easily say, as part of validation, I should not be really doing a write operation. That's really what validation is. So I could go and do a read from the directory to find if a username does not exist. And if it does not exist, we continue from this step. In the next step, we go and do a user write. There is still that small window within which that username can be taken. And that happens more commonly with tenants that have large number of users, and the username is a common username like John or Tom or something like that. So to avoid that problem, you will see that all of our self-asserted providers will actually immediately try to do a user write. So attempting to write in the directory itself acts as a strong enough validation that we basically ended up doing that as a validation technical profile. So I don't think we ever do a user read. The only validation technical profiles in the starter pack will be user write, and then the password check that we do using login, non-interactive login directly to login.microsoftonline.com. Any other questions before I move to some more confusing slides? Okay, so let me see if. Yeah, so that was part of, I think it's a good point. So the question is what happens when there is a response from a validation technical profile, and what happens when there is a failure versus success. So in Ronnie's demo, he showed that if this validation technical profile, let's go back. So this one, let's say AD user write profile using object ID. For simplicity, let's assume it was a REST API. So in the REST API case, if it returns a 200, that's a success, it will move forward. If it returns an error, in this self-asserted profile, it will stay on the same page and show an error at the top. And that error can also be returned by the REST API. In the case of Graph API, because we have our own provider and it's sort of a shim between IEF and AD Graph API, we have a lot of processing that happens depending on what graph returns. So graph could return an error saying this username is duplicate, in which case we might show that as a string telling the user that this ID is taken. But Graph API can return a number of other codes, and based on that we might have to show a different error to the user, or different message to the user. So all of that logic is handled underneath, but the user journey will not move forward with this configuration. If there's one validation technical profile and it fails, user journey will not move forward. If there are two validation technical profiles, IEF will go through the first one. If it fails, it will stop right there and give the error. If it succeeds, it will go to the second one, and if that fails, it will still stay on the same step. And when the user clicks continue the next time, let's say there was an error in the second one, it says you have an invalid phone number, go fix your phone number or loyalty ID. And when the user changes their loyalty ID, it will then execute both the validation technical profiles before moving forward. Now there is a flag if you want to convert this AND condition into an OR condition. That is possible, but the default is that it's an AND. It will go through every validation technical profile every time, and if there's an error, it will stay on that step. Okay, so let's move forward. This is how input claims, input claim transformations, and output claims and output claims transformations are processed. Question? There is I don't remember the flag from the top of my head. There is a metadata item in which you basically say that if any of the validation technical profiles passes, just move forward. In that case, what happens is, let's say you had 3 validation technical profiles. It will run the first one. If it passes, it won't even run the second and third. If first fails, it will go to the second one. If that passes, it will move out. If that fails, it will go to the third one. If that passes, it will move. If that also fails, then it will stay on the same step. So that is how that is done. The exact metadata item you'll have to follow up. I can find out and let you know how to do the setting. Okay. Okay, so there is another sort of a challenge, because now we have all input claims transformations, and then we have input claims. So if you remember, if I step back, this is my self-asserted profile update. This has input claims and output claims, and it can have input claims transformations and output claims transformation. It references a validation technical profile that is going to invoke when the user clicks continue. This is that validation technical profile. So the technical profile that is used as validation technical profile. This has its own input claims, persisted claims, and it can have output claims. So the question is, what order and how do these get processed? This diagram attempts to represent that. When the user journey is executing, at some point when the claims exchange step is invoked, the IEF is going to do input claims transformations of the technical profile which is yet to be invoked. So the technical profile has not been invoked. IEF will first start doing the input claims transformations, and whatever transformations it does, it will put them in the in the claims bag that it maintains. Then it is going to invoke the self-asserted provider and send the input claims. So let's say self-asserted provider has display name. This is a bad example, but just tolerate me. So let's say it has display name, and we want to show display name, and we want user to modify the display name. But in the claims bag, we did not have display name. We only had first name and last name. If an input claims transformation was created that converted the first name and last name into a display name, that display name would be created and set in the system even before self-asserted provider is executed. So regardless of whether self-asserted provider succeeds or fails, we have that additional claim in the system. So that is how input claims transformations almost always work. So input claims transformation are processed. They are sent as input claims. So now input claims can include display name in the policy. Then self-asserted will show the UI. In the UI, user can do whatever they want to do, and then they click the continue button. As soon as they click the continue button, the input claims transformations that are listed on that validation technical profile are done by the self-asserted provider. So this is again before invoking the validation profile. I can tell from everybody's face that I have completely confused. Not, even I'm confused myself. Okay, you guys are following me? I'm confused. So self-asserted is going to do input claims transformations that are referenced on the validation technical profile. But because validation technical profile still needs to be invoked, they're done ahead of time. And then the validation technical profile is invoked with all those input claims. This second set of input claim transformations never makes it out into the claims back for the user journey. It's just done internally so that the validation technical profile can be invoked. There is another reason to it. The other reason is that this process, where from the show UI all the way to the output, once we get the output, it can be repeated multiple times. And so every time it is repeated, we want it to be a clean slate. We don't want it to be like every time you are, let's say, incrementing some number by 1. Every time the user says something, it will keep incrementing that number by 1, or some other weird transformations can happen. So we never do that. Yes.
You said like the input claims transformation on the user journey, they're executed and then they're fed into the profile.
Yeah. So input claims transformation are executed first. They will generate some new claims. If any of that claim is an input claim, then it will be fed.
But then, if in your profile, in your user journey, you have a step after that one, is that input claim generated the previous step still available, or do you regenerate?
The transformation, the result of the transformation is available in all the subsequent steps. Yeah. So can you see? Okay, it doesn't show the mouse. So this one. These ones, whatever we generate out of this, they are available to all subsequent ones because they're immediately put in the claim bag. And this step is guaranteed to happen only once. Okay. Now once it enters the self-asserted provider, user can keep clicking continue with all the bad inputs. That is never recomputed. But the one inside after show UI is recomputed every time. It's a different bag, right? And it's a sort of a temporary bag. So it is recomputed every time, and so let's say user is giving first name and last name, and we are computing a display name to send to the directory. It will be recomputed every time based on what the input at that time was. Then those are sent to the validation technical profile. Validation technical profile can do REST API, AD Graph API, login, non-interactive, whatever it needs to do. Then that sends output claims. Then we apply some output claims transformations inside the self-asserted provider, and only if the claims that are generated from the output claims transformations can make to user journey if they are also the output claims of the self-asserted. So let's say I have an output claim from validation technical profile that's I don't know, object ID. But I don't put it as output claim of self-asserted provider, it will never make into user journey. That object ID disappears, it dies. You have to add it as an output claim of the self-asserted provider for it to get out into the claims back of the user journey storage. So this slide is basically a way for me to organize how all these between the technical profiles, the transformations, input, output claims, how do they all happen? Yes, sir.
If the claim is put into the output claim transformation and not put into the output claims, it's actually a bug.
What do you mean? What do you mean?
Because it's kind of useless putting something in the output claim transformation without putting it into the output claims because the data is just lost.
You mean, so what you're saying is only here, right? This part? This is what you're referring to? So if you get some output claims, you do an output claims transformation. Theoretically, today, we can say that is true. But the reason we did not, and maybe we should enforce that, the reason we probably did not enforce that was because theoretically, we could have claims that need to be processed by the self-asserted provider without sending out. So I'll give you an example of password. In the password flow, even if you have password as an output claim, we actually never push it back into the user journey storage. So if you have anything that is labeled user input type as password, even if you have it output claims transformation that does something with it and then you have it in output claims, you'll refuse to send it out. There's some special processing for that claim. Having said that, I think for almost everything else what you're saying is true. If you end up putting an output claims transformation, generate a claim and never consume it, theoretically it's a bug. You're right. Yes, sir.
If there are multiple validations in protocols, the self-asserted one, you can pass outputs from one input to the next.
Yes.
And still scope that self-asserted.
Yes, so when we implemented this, we implemented and we figured out it could be done, that you can actually pass. Then we thought about it and we said, okay, let's leave it. It's good functionality to have. But that's a good point. It has been used actually as a feature in some profiles I have seen. I think I don't know if you have also used it one or two profiles.
Yeah, I didn't realize I was using it.
Yeah, but I think people have used this. So basically, what he's saying is, I'll just repeat it for everybody to know, that you can theoretically get output claims from one validation technical profile and then send it as input claims to another technical profile. And you can even do input and output claims transformations in between those steps. So that is doable if you have dependency between validation technical profiles. Like I was saying, when we initially started off, we wanted to have it a stateless model where one validation technical profile should not depend on the second one, but we found certain scenarios in which it was actually useful. Okay, so what I'll do is I can quickly flip back to the policy, which you will not be able to see because I forgot to press escape. Okay, and let me go down and take an example from this. Is this okay? The font size, can you see at the back? Okay. So let's say if I were to basically go and add a new claim type to collect from the user. So let me, this is how I would do in my office. So this is completely what do they say? It's not choreographed at this point. Not that my presentation was so good that I should say it was choreographed or anything, but this is what I would do in my office. So I will go basically through orchestration step 1. I will look at, oh, this is a claims provider selection, IDP. Okay, I have a claims exchange where we are going to federate with an external IDP. And then we are going to read AD user object from the directory using altsec ID, which means this is for social accounts. And then we have a precondition that we discussed earlier. If the authentication source is local account, it's going to skip this step because this action is set to true. By the way, I have missed this once where this set false. This was set to false, and I came and I said, okay, authentication source is set to local account, then it should skip. and it was actually not the case, and I couldn't locate that bug for a while. Okay, so then I'll go to the next one. Here we are trying to read the user object from, if it's a local account, we'll read the user object from the directory using the object ID. And then I have my self-asserted profile update. And so I needed to add a new field in my self-asserted profile update. So let me go to the top, and I will go to the top, and I will add a new claim type. And the claim type I'm adding is country, because what happened was that for some hypothetical reason, we needed to go and add country for all user objects. And now the user needs to be given an option to modify their country so that they can, basically select a different country. Actually, let me make it a city, because country is already declared as a field. I think it's already, let me check. I think it's already in the starter pack maybe. Okay, it's not. So let's go with country. So they need to be given an option to modify their country. And I want the user to see your country/region. Actually, I should not put a colon, it's automatically added. It's still a string type. I will leave it as text box for now, but ideally in the case of a country, it should be a drop down. And now I will just copy this, because I have a tendency to fat finger stuff. I'll go to my profile update. So this is my profile update. And because in my user journey, there was all, in every, before the self-asserted profile update, there was a AD user read. There were 2 AD user read calls, one for social logins and one for local accounts. So I will essentially assume that there is an input claim that is happening here. There's an input claim that we will get here. I still need to modify those AD profiles to get the country. But I'm adding it here as an input claim with the assumption that if it was already retrieved, it will show it, pre-fill it on the UI. And I will also add it as an output claim, because I want user to see it. If I did not add it as an output claim, the user will not see it, and most likely it will fail with some error saying you have an input claim but it's not used. All right. So now I have country that will show up on the UI. You have to trust me on that. I cannot run the policy because I don't think I have enough time, and I have set it up for very what should I say, impromptu execution. So I will go to this profile now where I want to write, and I will use this. I need to copy this first, and user write profile using. Let's search again. Okay, and now when we are trying to do a write to directory, we are going to look up the user using object ID. So that does not change. But in the persisted claims, we are going to go and modify and add this new claim. In the context of the directory, persisted claim is what is actually written down against the user object. But input claim is what is used to locate the user object. So input claims are not used for any purpose other than locating the user object. And persisted claims will need to have this object ID, which is in the input claim, just for parity between input claims and persisted claims, because you could have scenarios where your input claim could be email address, but if you did not have it in persisted claim, it may not be written. That seems like a weird state to be in. So we sort of mandate that the input claim must also be appear as a persisted claim. So now we will just make this a persisted claim. So as a result of this, if the user gives any country on the self-asserted page, they will be able to, it will be sent to this profile and it will be written in the directory. But when they come second time, it will not show up pre-filled, right? So now I need to go to AD user read using object ID, which is the next technical profile, and I need to add it as an output claim. so that it will show up for the local accounts. It will still not show up for the social accounts. And for social accounts, I need to do the same thing with AD user read using alternative security ID. And I'll do F3 again, F3 again. And it should also be an output claim here. Yes, so now if I run this, it will happen. Just believe me. But these are the changes I would need to make in order to get one more field in the profile edit. You have a question or comment? Okay. So if you guys have questions, I'm still here. I will not hold everyone now because it's coffee time and then there's another session, and I almost fell asleep, by the way, earlier today. So I don't want to do that to you guys. And yeah.
Show what this is.
Can you quickly do that?
Yeah, you bet. I'll do it real quick. Thank you. So I just want to take and thank you, Omar, very much for that. Just want to point out and in our documentation where the majority of this material is. Not the reference, the full reference that a couple of you have asked for, which we will provide. But if you go to our docs page in Azure, you see the left pane, and under Identity Experience Framework, we have a number of just quick things. A description of custom policies, especially if you want to teach others what you've learned, how to choose one versus the other, the basic, very, very basic concepts of a policy. Under the guide, it's a little more interesting. The Get Started, which I hope you all went through, tells you how to set up. And then configure a couple different flavors of identity providers. Use them as examples, right? But it kind of kicks you off with an Azure AD, Microsoft account, Google+, on all OIDC or OAuth 2 examples. There's a couple SAML examples for identity providers, and a few examples on RESTful APIs, including the example that, or not precisely, but very similar to the example that Ronnie showed you, which is basically how to validate user input using REST API. This is precisely what Chris Padgett from Cloud demoed earlier when you check the loyalty ID. So just a walkthrough on how to do that. I mean, you follow the steps, it will work, but we wanted to, and thanks to Omar and Ronnie, take you through the details to kind of what's happening underneath, so you don't find yourself so much copying and pasting, which we all do, but at least kind of know a little bit of the theory of what's underneath. And certainly to create the really creative things, you will need that. And then in the customized logging, we go through here to user input, which talks about how to do drop-downs, how to take text box, how to do force drop-downs, radio button selections, the custom attributes, how to set them up, how to read them, set up an app that will read them through the graph. Customize the UI, how to use those, the content providers. Each one's the 4 or 5 that we talked about. How do you link them to your own content? How do you do the token shape? This would have been John Araya's scenario. And it's really a map of what happens on the portal down to the policy. Just to point it out, you can see right here, this is actually one of the easiest things to do. You see the keys correspond directly to what's on the browser. And we have a preview here of configuring password complexity. This is something many customers have been asked for. We have it on private preview in the built-in policies, but we have a public preview on the website here for custom policies, right? And hopefully you'll see that pattern. We want to release many features ultimately in the built-in product, but for those of you who are working on this, that we are able to show you features sooner than that. And lastly, really important reference to here using App Insights. Said authored this article on how to put your policy into development mode. I urge you to, probably the very next thing you should do is go check this out. Put in development mode, be able to send the events from your execution, talk about debugging, right to Application Insights, so you can see the output of each one of your sequence of what's happening when it comes down to debug, see what the claims bag looked like at that point in time, what was sent, what was received. It's actually pretty powerful, and it says to us here, you do not use in production. The biggest reason to not use in production is because some of those claims in a production environment could be private information. But that's on you. Please do not do that. It's not what it was designed for. but this will tell you a little bit of how to get through that and use App Insights. There's much more you can do combining App Insights to go with your own event login in your app so that there's correlations between the two. Great. And you've asked for the PowerPoint presentations. We will send those out to all of you, both PowerPoint and in PDF, so you can use them yourselves. And we will absolutely publish a full reference documentation. We might really have to do it in pieces rather than kind of hold up one thing for the other. Okay. There's one more resource here that I want you to be aware of. And this is, and perhaps this will be covered by Padgett and Parag later. But if you look up GitHub B2C Advanced, you will come to this repository that has the full examples of all the policies that not only Chris demonstrated on cloud, iOS, and a number of other scenarios, pretty extensive list of scenarios that we've documented on how to do. If you go further in this particular tab, this is our most extensive documentation. The reason it's kind of hidden 3 clicks in a GitHub repository is because it's a little old. It's something we have to update, honestly. But it'll be entirely super useful to you if you don't mind a little bit names, and some things might have changed in terms of names, but the functionality is all correct.
By the way, this documentation has the complete list of claims transformation methods. Somebody asked earlier.
Yeah, it's in here.
Remember, it's here.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Anything else we need to add?
That's all. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you guys. Stick around for the next session.